Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Today, as part of a Hindu analysis, we'll be discussing 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, a very exciting offer for all of you. We have the 50% discount, which we previously also had at 24,999. However, now it's not a 15 months course, it's plus 3, it's an 18 months course, which you get in the same price. This is the unbox offer, and this offer is going to end on 28th of August. And do note that this is the last time we are running this offer at this price with a 6 months extension. So I hope that you will use this as an opportunity to become part of our family, and this is the best offer you can get. It was 15 months, now 18 months at the same price. With this, if you remember yesterday, I had given you a question and we will discuss the answer for it and we will see who have answered it correctly. We were discussing biomanufacturing yesterday, and I asked you out of these 4 sectors which can be used for, or in which biomanufacturing can be used, and the answer to that question was all of them, and all of you have given the right answer with regards to C being the right answer, all. So this is very encouraging that none of you got it incorrect. This question seems easy because you were very new to it, fresh to this topic. In the examination, these type of questions become difficult. I have one more question today, and some of you also pointed out something about the NPS. I will explain that concept to you because there's a misinterpretation on the part of how we look at it. NPS exists both for the what we call as government employees and for private individuals. What I was discussing was for private individuals, therefore there was no government contribution. The concept of that 14 to 18.5, we have an article on that. I will clarify on that and we will try to understand it. Basically, it should not be 3 columns but 4, which is NPS National Pension Scheme for private individuals, NPS for the government officials, and then UPS and OPS. Rather than just 2 divisions, NPS has to be divided. I was presuming that that would be clear, but let's discuss it again today so that we have clarity and we can create a table like this in the examination also. With this, let's look at the topics we are going to cover. So we will discuss a very interesting terminology which was there in the news, new age gateway devices. It actually has a very interesting purpose in our discussion because this can be asked in the examination and nobody will ever understand what it actually means. Then the middle path, this is the topic where I am going to discuss the UPS. There is a small article which came in the editorial. We will use it to again revisit certain points which can be used in the examination, and over and above that we can also do one more thing, which is we will also clarify on this aspect of NPS and how it is divided with regards to private and government officers. Then classical languages is very interesting, GS paper 1 related to art and culture, a very interesting article on this. Then 3 small but straightforward, one Boeing Starliner, then the INS Mumbai. This is important for us because it gives us an opportunity to learn all the destroyers and the frigates of the Navy, and last but not the least, out of the science section, interesting terminology. So today you are going to learn 2 very important terms. One is new age and second one is what is called sonoluminescence, which is based on water and the aspect related to sound and light. We will discuss all these in the next 45 to 1 hour. Okay, let's start with our first topic, which is new age gateway devices. Now this, when I say new age gateway devices, if you have no context, for example, if I show you this question, new age gateway devices are a pandemic in making and need regulation. If you are not introduced to this article, which has data out of the US, because as it is new age gateway devices in India are actually banned, but the idea is if this type of question comes through, nobody will ever understand what does this terminology actually mean until unless you are introduced to this whole concept, which is what is new age gateway device. That is why this article becomes important for the examination, because we can get blind questions like this, which we will discuss in the end how to tackle. Now, what do you mean by new age gateway devices? New age gateway devices are actually alternatives to cigarettes and any form of tobacco or nicotine based drug. So the terminology new age gateway device actually refers to e-cigarettes, vaping pens, ENDS, what is called electronic nicotine delivery systems, heat not burn HNB devices, and other heated tobacco products, which basically argue that they are healthier alternatives to the original. And this brings us to the concept of health and GS paper 3. The aspect of GS paper 3 is related to health here, that basically these are considered alternatives to cigarettes, to any tobacco based drug, and therefore the argument which is pushed in the newspapers, in advertising, is that this is better than the original. However, the author argues that these are much more dangerous than cigarettes itself, because they have both physical, mental and long-term impacts on the people or the children who are actually using this. So this is an epidemic in making and a pandemic in making in the US specifically. India already has banned since 2019 new age gateway devices. There was a lot of criticism which came through, but based on this article, we believe, and I think the government took the right step, because this is much more dangerous. It's not that tobacco is good, it is equally bad, it is, but the way this has been advertised, the volume at which the people are using this, the children are using this, it is even more dangerous than tobacco. This is the argument of the article, and let's try to understand it and contextualize it in the way the article tries to. Now, the new age gateway devices, as advertised, have the most lucrative market in children, ages 10 to 20 years of age. The data which has been provided is US specific, that in 2013, in the United States, high school students, 2.1 million, 7.7% were using e-cigarettes, and 5,50,000, which is 4.6% of middle school students, were using what we call as vaping pens or e-cigarettes in that regard. Now, this means that in the school bracket itself, we have a very high volume of students using what we call today as e-cigarettes. Now, to be very clear, these students would not have had access to tobacco, would not have access to cigarettes, because cigarettes can be only consumed in legal sense in the US after a certain age, and nobody is going to sell you cigarettes at that age. Between 10 to 20, maybe 10 to 15, nobody as it is going to sell you cigarettes. If you are stealing it, if you are using it, that's a separate issue altogether. But legally, there are multiple safeguards because of the anti-tobacco lobby in the US, that children will not have access to tobacco products. However, because these vaping pens and these e-cigarettes are shown as very cool and new vogue, what we call as the woke lifestyle, and this new concept of a harmless product, students are getting access to it. Now, the biggest misnomer, the biggest myth which students and children have in the US and specifically in the West as of right now, Australia also has this problem, New Zealand same story, US again same story, UK same story. They think that it is harmless water vapor which is based on flavors, and that is where we have to discuss 3 to 4 aspects which can be interesting for India to devise a further policy, and over and above that to understand the implications of this. See, there are 3 reasons why this is becoming such a big problem in the US, in the world, and there are 3 impacts of this in the larger context. Now, first is there is very standard targeted marketing which is happening in the US about this harmless water vapor, which has just a smoke with a flavor, and they argue that with these very bright colors and the multiple flavors which is available in, the argument is it is harmless, it is better than, and for the people who are already addicted to smoking, it is harmless, it is better, it is a better alternative. Now, it should have been an alternative for the people who already use it. Ironically, they found a new sector which is the academic level, school level, where they are actually pushing it. Now, first to burst this very big issue or myth or misnomer is that it is not a harmless water vapor. There is a very high concentration of nicotine in these e-cigarettes or what we call as new age gateway devices, and the argument is in certain cases the level of nicotine is much higher than in a cigarette, because there is a natural process through which tobacco gains that nicotine, and therefore the level of concentration which an e-cigarette can have would never be naturally available in a cigarette itself. And therefore, e-cigarettes in certain cases and vaping pens in certain cases have much higher concentration of nicotine, nicotinic acid in that regard, which in turn leads to a very strong addiction to it. This is the first thing, that it is not harmless, it does harm to you, it makes you addicted to this whole concept of vaping and e-cigarettes. But other than targeted marketing, there is a very interesting social aspect to this. And this brings us to GS paper 1, which is the aspect of how vaping and e-cigarettes in America and even in India, if people are evading this law, because the government recently asked for more stringent ban on the e-cigarettes and new age gateway devices, it's about status. It's about status. There's a certain coolness which is attached to e-cigarettes or vaping pens. At the same point of time, what this creates in children is fear of missing out or FOMO, which is that my friend is using it, and we all have been there in that regard, with regards to toys, with regards to phones, with regards to, even till today, even adults have what we call as envy and jealousy towards others, vis-a-vis he has that car, he has that house. The argument is, it creates a certain FOMO or fear of missing out, which is that I don't have access to this, why am I not doing it? If it is cool, I need to do it. So therefore, the image which has been developed within the society is vaping is cool, vaping is harmless, vaping is good. And therefore, if you are not part of this community of vapers and what we call as e-cigarettes, therefore you create a certain fear of missing out. And this has a larger impact in both cases of physical, mental and other tendencies which develop within the children. So the reason why this is becoming such a big pandemic type situation with across the US, Australia also has the same issue, that students and very, very young men and women are getting in a way addicted to e-cigarettes and nicotine, is because of this, the aura which has been created around this concept. Now, how is it GS paper 1? Because under social issue and social justice, you need to understand something, which is that sometimes this can be in a way made into a generalistic model and pushed into things which are considered bad for society but are accepted generally. So therefore, this is indoctrination in that regard, and this indoctrination in turn is leading to the physical and mental health impacts in that sense. Now, what is the physical impact? It's very easy, straightforward. It is smoke. So obviously, it is going to impact your lungs. It is going to impact your physical ability to breathe, and therefore there is physical impact for sure. It is not a harmless water vapor. It does impact the breathing ability of a person. Further, it physically makes you addicted to the substances which are there inside it, specifically the benzoic acid and the nicotinic acid, which is nicotine itself. And the idea is this creates an addictive tendency. If you are doing this at 10 to 20 years of age, there's a very good chance once you get access to much higher, what we call as illegal drugs, or somehow you are introduced to them, there's a very big tendency that they can become drug addicts. And therefore, from heroin to cocaine to what we call as the concept of marijuana, it can be anything. And therefore, though the medicinal, what we call as purposes and the medicinal impact of what we call as marijuana on the genetic disease has actually been established, but the idea is it leads to further addictive tendencies to even alcohol or any form of intoxicant. So marijuana or cocaine, heroin in America, there is a very big crisis, for example, called the opioid crisis. Opioid crisis is being actually addicted to opioids, which are painkillers and the drugs which are given to sedate you. So it adds to the opioid crisis in America. India doesn't have it at the scale. We have a different issue altogether, which is we use prescription drugs without taking prescription, and therefore antibacterial microbial resistance is developing through, which is we have antibiotics too much. That's a separate issue altogether. But opioid crisis itself is a very big issue in America as of right now. People addicted to drugs, drug addiction is a very big issue in America as of right now. And therefore, this is where there's a direct correlation between vaping, e-cigarettes, and the aspect of drug addiction. The second is more important, and therein comes the concept of GS paper 4, ethics, and the idea of emotional intelligence, emotions, and mental health. The concept is there has been a correlation in America to children using e-cigarettes, vaping, or any other form of new age delivery devices, and the concept of social anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues which develop from till suicidal tendencies because of the social pressure to do these things. And therefore, when it comes to India, the ban is fully justified, and the argument it actually turns out is that if tobacco is a problem, it creates a problem at a certain age bracket where people are taking a conscious choice to use it. There's addiction, tobacco is bad, everybody knows it, and you have all those images on the tobacco packets also which tell you the impact of that. However, when you look at e-cigarettes, when you look at vaping pens, their packaging shows it as a healthier alternative or something as a healthier life. It is something cool to be done. And therefore, firstly, it is impacting an age bracket which should never be introduced to cigarettes itself. And now they are using alternatives to cigarette. They are addicted to nicotine, which will make them more susceptible to further drug addiction. And because they are adolescents, because they are in such a young age, they are susceptible to not just physical impact, but to mental impact also. And therefore, at the volume it is happening in the US, it is a disaster in making, and there has to be regulations. Now, you would say, sir, it is related to the US. Then why are we talking about it? The concept is very simple. You can use this model to understand any form of addiction vis-a-vis the adolescent group or what we call as children. Therefore, the larger argument here is more important, which is what happens when the healthier alternative turns out to be more dangerous than the original. This is a very important point you need to understand. This is where we have to understand how marketing works, and we have to understand somehow something not medically proven or the larger culture around it can actually be more impactful. And a very good example of this, is sugar and what we call a sugar-free aspartame. Aspartame is a sweetener, artificial sweetener. You call it sugar-free. If you will see any Coke Zero, you see any form of what we call as Coke or Pepsi or anything which has, it says sugarless, sugar-free, it will have aspartame. Aspartame is much more dangerous than sugar. Sugar is bad, calories, it is the biggest legalized drug in the world and does impact your health with diabetes and further impacts. But the idea is aspartame has much higher impact. And now there are sugar-free children's cereals, sugar-free baby formulas, and therefore aspartame-based what we call as food or drinks in turn has a larger impact on you which has not been properly proven. And therefore, this is where you have to understand that this model is not specific to the US, can be used in any case altogether. Wherein, for example, you can take COVID. In COVID, so much misinformation was there, where allopathic medicine and one of the institutions, I will not take the name to qualify it, one of the institutions had to say sorry in the newspaper after the Supreme Court said it, because they gave an alternative to that medicine, which in turn was much more dangerous than the original medication for COVID. And people were used and misused. The same institution related to a certain Baba for year on year was arguing that the alternative to cancer medication and cancer or any form of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, alternative to cancer medication and therapy was his institute, which used to give quote unquote certain natural medicines which used to stop cancer. Never happened, but healthier alternative to, for example, something which could have saved the life, but in first stage, second stage, people went to these standard institutions and they were looking for example, certain formulas created with natural products which in turn impacted. The simple point of the matter is that alternatives to a dangerous thing can also be equally dangerous. This is where this should also impact you, because we do that. We make conscious choices when we go to the grocery shop today, where we try to figure it out that, okay, I am trying to buy, for example, I have a biscuit which has sugar, which has sugarless. However, the sugarless is actually having aspartame. It's better to buy the sugar-based biscuits in that regard, because there the calorie is the issue. Here it's a chemical in that regard. Same would be true for multiple things which we show as alternatives to original and original dangerous products. Therefore, that is why I tell you how a small, very simple, straightforward article can become so important in understanding the larger concept of the politics of, or you want to say the deceit which these different institutions and these manufacturers, there's a lobby for everybody. The concept, for example, how at one point of time, and a very good example of this again could be, and I'll give you one more example, this is the last example I give you, is for example, ghee and mustard oil, sarson ka tel and ghee. In the 1990s, 2000s, throughout the 2000s, there was a certain movement which started which said that ghee and mustard oil, and this was done by doctors also, that sarson ka tel and ghee are very bad, what we call as fats, and they should not be consumed because they will lead to cholesterol levels going high, and therefore all heart diseases happen because of that. So what was devised was refined oil, then came the Saffola type of heart conscious oil, then came rice bran oil, this, that, and ironically we are back to the same point, full circle. Why? Because now doctors are saying that ghee and mustard oil and was better than the alternatives we have today, because they marketed it that way that these oils are better, refined oils are better than the original forms of what we call as fats or oils used in India. This is where you see sometimes we have to be conscious about these things, and this is where this article comes through. So, if you have to answer a question like this, new age gateway devices are a pandemic in making, need regulation. Firstly, you can't answer this if you don't know what is a new age gateway device. So, e-cigarettes, vaping pens, ends, any based tobacco heating based concept, and in the introduction you are going to add that. Thereafter, in the body, you are going to talk about how these devices are marketed to children, talk about the concept of mental and physical along with the myths around it, and in the conclusion say that regulation is needed because it creates addictive tendencies and overall impact on the people itself, and specifically on children because they are the future generation, they are the impacted the most. So, simple straightforward article, but has lot to teach us from GS paper 1 to GS paper 2 to GS paper 4 and GS paper 3. All topics are covered within the same article. So, I hope you now know how to also look at an article and take out what you have to, and you can be pushing it into different answers in that regard and make a very good answer in the larger context. With this, we move to the politics of language in India. Coming out of art and culture straightforward, I would have taught this very recently in the class itself, and this was something which was in the ranks for a very long time, which is the concept of classical languages. Now, there are three things which we first need to establish is what is a classical language, what is the criteria to become a classical language, and what is the politics around and what is the point of becoming a classical language. Now, in India today, there are total 6 languages which are called classical: Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia and Sanskrit. Basically, all South Indian languages plus Sanskrit and Odia. Now, out of these 6, 4 which is Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam and Odia are managed by, meaning if you have any form of what we call as development policy change which has to happen in these languages, it happens through the Central Institute of Indian Languages. Tamil and Tamil language itself has an autonomous body which takes care of it. Center for Tamil is autonomous, and Sanskrit is not pushed by either. There are multiple universities which have chairs and they receive funds directly from the Union Education Ministry to be pushed. So, there are 6, this is first very important, but how do you ascertain that a language is classical and what is the advantage of becoming a classical language? There are 4 things which or and have to be met, meaning if any language in India has to be called a classical language. You need to either be under one of these categories, or you should be in either of these categories somehow. If you have multiple, very good. First is, it says high antiquity of the early text recorded history over a period of 1500 to 2000 years. Now, this basically says that the language should be extremely old, at least 2000 years, if not 1500 years. Now, this is where most of the languages of India, other than these 6, actually automatically get disqualified, because be it Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi, you have the other regional languages, they are all developments of either the Gupta or the post-Gupta period. Some of them even go into the medieval period, which would put their basic history at maximum 800, 900, 1000 years. So, for example, it is the Pala dynasty, under which the Buddhist dynasty of the Bengal sector, the east, under which Abhata developed, out of which, for example, Maithili and Bengali come through. Odia existed as a separate, what we call as branch, which later got interconnected to this Abhata concept. That is why that it is older than 1500. The same way, you have languages such as the offshoots of Upbranch. They all fall in the post-Gupta, Gupta or early medieval, which is close to, you can say 800, 900 or 1000 CE. So, therefore, they may be 500 years down the line, these languages will become, you will become eligible for this criteria, not right now. Not right now, maybe by 3000, by basically 3000 CE, they may be accepted as classical languages. The second is, if this is there should also be and can be the next, which is a body of ancient literature and text, which is considered a valuable heritage by generations of speakers. This is important, wherein at least, for example, the Sangam texts, the Vedic literature, Vedic corpus, this puts Sanskrit and Tamil straightforward into that concept. Then you have also an old, what we call as old Malayalam, old Kannada, old what we call as Odia literature, which exists. Then literary tradition be original, not borrowed from other speech community. Now, some of the languages actually get disqualified here, because most of the languages which you see today are either derivatives of certain languages. For example, Pali Prakrit would be derivative of Sanskrit, and therefore Apabhransh would be a derivative of Prakrit, and therefore it should not be borrowed, it has to be original. And therein lies another disqualification point, wherein maybe at 3000 BCE, which is 500 years from now, 600 years from now, this may be met, but this may not be met. Now, it is on the Ministry of Culture to decide if they still want to push it or not. And then the classical language and literature should be distinct from the modern. If there is disjuncture, it is okay, meaning there is something called old Sanskrit and then Sanskrit which you and me study today. Disjuncture is okay, it should not be borrowed. So, basically there are two main points which matters is that it should have a high antiquity, very old history, and second is that it should not be a borrowed tradition. If these two are met, more or less you get a classical language, what we call as status. Now, if the criteria are so hard, and I say or and because it is on the Ministry of Culture to decide. There are multiple websites which will say that all criteria need to be met. There will some say that one of the criteria should be met, but it is based on the Ministry of Culture how it takes a call on this. That do they want to apply both the criteria, they want to apply one. Most of the languages fall, whatever the 6 classical languages we have actually meet both of these. But there could be a case that one could be exempted based on the what we call as age of the language itself, because at the end of the day there would be some cross connections for sure. So, this is not a set rule. So, do not later think, or if you Google this, you will find a lot of misinformation, which is they will say and or. That is why I said both are possible. It is totally on case to case basis on the language. Now, what do you get out of it? If you become a classical language, the Education Ministry will provide you certain benefits to promote it. 2 major annual international awards can be there, and you can set up Center for Excellence for Studies in the universities for that language. University Grants Commission will give you, the UGC will give you certain budget for classical language chairs. Chairs means a professor's position, emeritus professor position, so that you can basically develop this language further. This is where Sanskrit has been expanded quite a lot, because most of the central universities have a Sanskrit department, and therefore Sanskrit, rather than having an autonomous body, it has multiple centers of excellence. Now, this is the static portion. This is pure concept which we would have discussed in class, wherein what is a classical language, why is classical language important, which are the classical languages, these 6 being the one. This is pure static, Nitin Singhania based art and culture, not very difficult to understand. Now, why does this become important and why are we discussing it here, is because there is a lot of controversy which has developed since 2020, and now there has been call out from the 4 languages which are under the CIIL, which is Central Institute of Indian Languages. See, in 2020 it was revealed in the Lok Sabha that when it came to pushing these classical languages, 643 crores was pushed on Sanskrit and only 29 crores for the other 5 classical languages. And out of that, even Tamil is getting pushed. The 4 languages which are coming under the CIIL, which is Odia, Malayalam, Telugu and Kannada, they are arguing that we don't have any fiscal sanctioning power or not even a budget properly. So, in most cases, you get reimbursements for the events which are happening. The argument which is being pushed in that in these 4 languages, they are not able to organize different, what we call as you can say simple, straightforward, even Kavi Sambelans as they are called, or even the Sangams of the literature specialists is not being able to be organized because there is no money. Further, there is one more issue that they are understaffed, they do not have budgets. So, basically any language which is under CIIL right now is facing a budget crunch, do not have people in their offices, they can't organize different conferences and even award ceremonies, and because so much has been spent on there is a allocated budget out of which 90% or even 99% of it is being spent over Sanskrit, there is only 1% left for the other languages. So, they are saying that how do we promote these languages in that regard. And this is where there is an article today in the newspaper where these 4 are saying that we need autonomous status. Like the Center for Tamil, we need Center for Malayalam. We want an autonomous body which has its own budget other than 4 different languages fighting for the same budget. And this brings to you the politics of language, this brings to you the politics of how the budgetary allocation over this language itself is creating a lot of controversy. And therefore, pushing Sanskrit at 99% of the budget, 643 crores vis-a-vis 30 crores for other 5 makes no sense. And now the classical language issue comes to the forefront, and you can expect a question in the prelims examination and in GS paper 1 vis-a-vis why are they talking about these things. Now, a more realistic question, I hope that the static portion is sorted, and now you also understand why are we discussing it, because of the CIL issue and the aspect of these 4 languages saying that we need more budgetary allocation, we are understaffed, we do not have people, we are not able to push these languages, award ceremonies, conferences are not being able to happen, there is no what we call as development, or we cannot even fund the scholars, we can't give them stipends, they are basically cash strapped like anything. They are getting 2 to 3 crore budget out of where 600 times more someone else is getting it, or some other institution is getting it, which is absurd that way. Now, for the examination, you are going to answer this question in the comment section as you did today, which is consider the following: Marathi, Tamil, Odia, Hindi. Which of the above are classical languages of India? Only 3, only 2, all of them, or none of them? This is a simple question, but based on the simple concept of 6, you should be able to answer it. This is a realistic question based on a topic which has been in the news. I hope that you are clear about the controversy and you are also clear about the concept of what we call as what makes a classical language. Remember, there is no direct, if you go to the PIB, I picked up this right from the PIB, it does not say and or, and therefore it is totally on the concept of the government to decide if they will apply 1, 2, all 4 or only 1. This is totally on the case to case basis on the language. Now, with this our second topic is over. I hope you will all answer this in the chat box. and we will see who gets it correct. This is an easy question, 2 questions, but I try to create this basic habit of you looking at this. If you want to practice more questions, then 5 more questions will be pushed into the Telegram section. If you haven't subscribed to our Telegram channel, in Telegram 5 questions will be there for you based on the topics today to be solved in a polling fashion. You should do that. We'll also tell you how good you are basically in grasping this in first go and then practicing it. Within the first, by 12 o'clock, it will be there in the Telegram channel. Now comes the topic which we discussed yesterday, but now we have a little bit of data which we can use in the examination. The basic crux of what we did yesterday does not change, but we have a very interesting what we call as fodder, or you can say quote, or this data which can be useful in writing an answer for the unified pension scheme, which is that pension outlay for states and union territories, pension burden was 5,22,000 crores, which is 6 to 21% of total revenue receipts, meaning out of all the receipts they get, 6 to 21% is pushed into what we call as revenue expenditure, which is quite huge, and that is the reason why in 2004 there was a need to change it from the old pension scheme to the new pension scheme. But the question would be, how does this aspect come through, which is if pensions still have to be pushed and it's a contributory scheme, then this is very specifically talking about NPS for government servants. And I'll try to make this distinction today. Well, I'll try to not give you 3 but 4 different categories under which you'll understand. I presumed you understood it, but we will try to actually clarify it more. The other argument for pro and anti pension is also given in the article, which is that the pensioners argue that it is deferred wages because we contribute something, and the government argues that it is a burden on the future generations to pay pensions. Now, not giving pensions properly since 2004 to 2024 under NPS, the real problem emerged was that states' capacity was negatively affected because the IS officers or even everybody was demotivated, and second was it in a way brought down the young job seekers who thought it as an incentive to work for this job. Now, this topic you already know. Let's try to reinforce it again, but with a new aspect, because this which you all have quoted in the comment section, 14% is totally correct, totally agreed. I agree with you that it is 14%, but this aspect I muted because I took it as a concept of national pension scheme and not new pension scheme specifically for government servants. So when we were discussing it yesterday, I'm trying to basically, this is a corrigendum if you want. When we were discussing it yesterday, I did not create a distinction between voluntary and government servant one, and therefore that is why the concept of only contribution from the people and not from the government. But let's do one thing, let's redo it, but with a new category in that regard. If you remember, we did OPS, which is old pension scheme. Then I will write NPS private and then I write NPS government, and thereafter you get UPS, which is unified pension scheme, which is in the news. Now, OPS, it was very simple, complete a certain tenure of your service and thereafter no contribution is needed. This does not change, no contribution is needed, and you will get 50% of your last drawn salary as pension, One of you asked me, is that 18.5% of the 10% or of the whole salary? It is 18.5% of the salary, not of that 10%. I will write it down again. You have 50% of last drawn salary, and herein all the burden is on the government, none on the employee. Now, if it is NPS private, the exact same thing which I gave you yesterday is actually true. There is a certain tenure you have to complete, but there is no compulsions here. It is contributory, which is you have to contribute. That in turn is set into market linked schemes, and when you are a private individual, there is no government what we call as contribution. This was the aspect which confused a little bit a lot of you in that regard, or some of you, which is that if it is a private individual, you and me, it is a market link scheme, we get a return, and then the concept of 60% can be withdrawn at 60 years and 40% will be pushed in as pension. So, here the government had no liability, but the employee had all the liability. This is for you and me. I will create a distinction here. With government, it is going to be the same tenure based, because tenure comes through here, tenure matters, and it is contributory. But for government, the idea was your contribution as an employee, there was no capping. No capping, it can be any percentage of your salary. However, the government used to push 14%. This is where that 5 lakh crore rupees comes through, which is the burden in 2023. And therefore, thereafter the same story, 60%, 40% and pension concept, no assured pension. Here both the government and the employee are involved. And therefore, UPS after completing 25 years, it is contributory. UPS is not open to you and me, and here again employee now has to minimum contribute 10% and the government will contribute 18.5%, and therefore there will be assured pension of 50% of last on salary, 10,000 and minimum, what we discussed yesterday. Now, the idea is very simple, that for the government it is from 14 to 18.5. This is the argument which you gave and everybody is giving. But this is where I did not create a distinction between these two yesterday. So, when I was talking about NPS, I was not talking about NPS as the NPS of government, I was talking about national pension scheme. So, with this new information of 6 to 21%, we have a more holistic answer, and I hope now this should be 150% clear, because it's not that that was incorrect, it's just that there was an assumption. So, I have now removed that assumption and I have brought in more clarity. So, use this for the examination, look at the context of the question, if this is needed or this is needed. But the idea is higher burden, 7,000 crores more has to be now given by the government. Still debate is on that was this needed or not. That is why now the concept of modified NPS. So, you can get a question like this also, directly picked up from the article. Unified pension scheme overcomes the shortcomings of the NPS, analyze. And this is exactly given here, you see. The modified pension scheme overcomes some of the shortcomings of NPS. This is how UPSC sometimes just straightforward picks up an article and makes an answer or makes a question out of it in that regard, which is shortcoming word has been used and you now have a question. Practice yesterday's question also, practice today's question also. This will keep on recurring at least for the next 10 to 15 days in the newspaper, because there will be multiple articles which will be written about the UPS concept. Let us see how it goes. But I hope this time has been fruitful and now there is more clarity with regards to this. Here it is 14%, here it is market linked, no contribution by the government itself, private government differentiation is there. Now, with this we go to a topic which again we have discussed previously and has dented the credibility of Boeing, which has already been in the news with multiple issues in that regard. The first thing is that Boeing has been in the news for all wrong things, that the faulty bolt intern led to an emergency door coming out of a Boeing aircraft. Boeing itself has been in around the controversy around the Starliner itself, which is multiple delays. Then the whole issue of the Neo aircraft, which in turn led to 2 fatal and very, very disastrous what we call as aircraft crashes also. So, from the 73 MAX 8 to the recent faulty what we call as bolts, to a lot of statements which are coming from Boeing itself where safety and risk was considered quite problematic. The Starliner project was their way to redeem themselves. Now, the US, see the Russians and previously the USSR has the Soyuz rocket. The Soyuz rocket has a capsule and that capsule is used to dock with the International Space Station and it is a crew module. The Russians are very consistent here with regards to this, which is a crew module, and Russia. This has been a very all-weather, very reliable product or reliable crew module for the Russians. The Americans previously used to have what are called the shuttle program, and a turning point in the shuttle program was the Columbia disaster, in which we also lost Kalpana Chawla. After that, they shut down the shuttle program and they were looking for alternatives. Now, one alternative was a government contract to Boeing to develop a certain crew module, and in the same space emerged SpaceX, and you have the Dragon module now, the Crew Dragon module. Now, Crew Dragon module has been very reliable, 19 such dockings with the International Space Station, and has a no failure till this point. They were given a budget of 2.1 billion, and 5 to 6 billion was given to Boeing to develop the Starliner project. Now, Starliner project from the beginning itself has been problematic because there have been multiple delays. So, as of right now, if you and me have to go to the ISA, we can either go to the Russians or go to SpaceX and say that please send us to the ISA. They will then ask us to board the Crew Dragon module and we will go there. Now, America was going to become the only country in the world to have two available options, one very cheap Boeing one because it is funded by the government, a very cheap option but two options to go to the ISA or any form of crew based missions into space. Now, Boeing had already created a lot of issues, wherein there was a test flight bad software in 2019, overdue in 2022. This project was introduced in 2014-15. Thereafter, a parachute failed in the basic test in that regard. Helium leak again came through. Further isolated and other what we call as software or hardware based issues were also pointed out. Then there were again multiple leaks which were happening. Still, the first human testing flight was done with two very important and you can say veteran astronauts, Sunita Williams and Barry, and therefore Barry Williams as is called, Barry Williams and Sunita Williams, both were sent on the Boeing Starliner, a project in which only 1 week they had to dock with the International Space Station, has now become a 8-month mission. And they are now stuck in the ISA. Barry Wilmore and Sunita Williams are actually stuck in the ISA. Because it is believed that when they went into space, there are 2 to 3 issues which have emerged in the thruster zone and again multiple leaks in the helium tanks. So, this is the module. It goes on the Atlas V rocket. You have the space for 5 people to sit inside, and it was considered better because there are only 4 spaces in a Dragon space module in that regard. Now, the problem is it's too unsafe to bring them back. Thruster failure, helium leaks. What the Boeing engineers are saying is that whatever deformity has come will automatically fix itself on re-entry. Now, Boeing was given a very high budget for this. They were pushed to do this. There have been multiple delays. This whole concept of the Starliner project itself has been questioned multiple times. Before this happened, their aircrafts were failing, and now this is not good optics for Boeing that they are now basically stuck in the ISA and they can only come back in February of 2025. There is one Dragon module already docked in the ISA, but that will bring back the 4 astronauts who need to come back, and there will be a project which will go in February, and that will bring them back in February of 2025. Again, it will be SpaceX and Dragon. Now, the reason why they are not taking chances is because of this image. These are the images of the Columbia shuttle coming, re-entering into the American airspace, into the Earth's atmosphere, which in turn led to the death of all 7 crew members on the shuttle. Because any leak or any fatal what we call as defect can lead to the heat shield to be destroyed, and on re-entry with air friction there will be a lot of what we call as temperature and pressure created on the module itself. Now, for you this is just an update, and this shows you the complexity of space travel, and this also is a very important reminder to the ISRO that the Gaganyaan program has to be seen in the context of these type of what we call as issues. It's not that NASA did not know and Starliner was made just by Boeing. NASA and Boeing both were working on it. We have to make sure that we don't do the same mistakes, but this is going to be the end of Boeing's either project or this will be totally scrapped, because this is not good. 2 veteran astronauts stuck in the ISA because of a faulty, this is actually the live image of the Starliner module docked into the ISA itself. So, this is something which we will keep on updating you about, but this is important for a Gaganyaan program, which is our men and our 3 astronauts going into the LEO and coming back. It's our manned mission into the space itself, and therefore Boeing's what we call as Starliner project is stuck, and they will only come back in February of 2025. With this, 2 topics relevant for prelims examination. First is INS Mumbai going to Sri Lanka. This is the first time INS Mumbai is going to Sri Lanka with the what we call as spare parts for the Dornier what we call as aircraft, which India supplies to Sri Lanka. Now, in itself it is not a very big thing, but it allows us to understand 2 to 3 things. What is the fleet of what we call as destroyers, frigates, and what are the classes of them, and what is the weapons technology on them. Now, when we talk about the what we call as the INS Mumbai, first thing is it is a Delhi class destroyer made under Project 15. It is a guided missile destroyer, and the Delhi class was commissioned. It's a quite old mission that was, since 1995 we have this, commissioned in 2001, then in 2013. The Rajput class of destroyers are now being in a way replaced by the Delhi class. Delhi class has already a replacement for it, which is called the Kolkata class. So, if you, I will show this to you later, we have 3 classes as of right now of destroyers. One is called Kolkata, Delhi, Rajput. Rajput has Rajput, Rana, Ranjit, Ranveer and Ranvijay, and these are the oldest project. They need to be replaced. Now, out of these 5, 3 were replaced by Delhi class guided missile destroyers, which is Delhi, Mysore and Mumbai. Mumbai is the one which is now going into Sri Lanka. But we have developed a better class than this, which is called Kolkata class, which is stealth guided missile destroyer, wherein detecting this is much more difficult in the high seas than a Delhi class. And you have Kolkata and Kochi as the 2 ones which are 2 INS what we call as destroyers, which are commissioned as of right now under this class. We are transitioning into this. There will be no further Delhi class destroyer. All of them will be Kolkata class destroyer only. Now, this brings to us what is a destroyer then, and this is basically the different types of vessels which the Navy operates in. The biggest is called the aircraft carrier, very simple, straightforward. It is a mobile airport on the waters, and add to it MiG-29K and the Rafale, you basically have any point of time first strike capability and what we call as a deterrent in the sea, which is away from the mainland itself and can be a very important addition to the Navy. Then you have something called a cruiser. Is the second largest ship, can be a guided missile destroyer also, but it is for the high seas. The problem with the cruiser is it is very big, and its detection by submarines and what we call as anti-submarine warfare, it is used, but it can be detected very quickly. Now come 2 types of vessels which are called destroyers and frigates. Destroyer is that ways smaller than a cruiser, bigger than a frigate, and this is proper anti-submarine, anti-ship, and a very, very important what we call as deterrent. These are very quick to move. You can have a stealth and a non-stealth. This is an image of a Kolkata class, what we call as destroyer. Stealth means that detecting them in the seas is very difficult. Their cross section in the sonar and the radar is also very, very low, and therefore destroyers are seen to be the real workhorse. Then you have frigates. They are basically for submarines, because submarines move very quickly. So a destroyer cannot go over a certain speed. Therefore, frigates are actually for anti-submarine warfare. They are anti-ship also. They are anti-ship and anti-submarine. They are only anti-submarine, which is quick movement within the seas. Then you have what is called a corvette. Corvette is basically for coastal security. So the Coast Guard will have a corvette which is quick with some form of what we call as weapon system on it, but can go up down our coast very quickly, can move to a location very, very quickly. The most stealthiest of all is a submarine. The most what we call as biggest deterrence in war, anti-submarine warfare. All navies, it's all about anti-submarine warfare. Submarines, which are basically the U-boats of the Germans in that regard, becoming submarines. This is the future of warfare. It is about stealth, it is about non-detectability and having nuclear capability with SLBMs in that regard. Submarine launched ballistic missiles are the future, and most cases for us INS Arihant is very, very important. Last but not the least, the smallest of all vehicles, which is the amphibious assault ship, which can carry tanks and troops on it. And this was used, for example, in D-Day or in Normandy, which is that it can move towards the coast and the beaches and then push in the different what we call as troops or vehicles into it. So this is the opportunity which we have through this article to understand this differentiation. If you've never known this, you should be very clear about this differentiation: frigate, destroyer, corvette, what is the differentiation. Now, just to complete this whole set, this is an Kolkata class. This is a Kolkata class destroyer, and you can see how capable they are, and that is why they are considered so dangerous, which is they can have BrahMos, 16 different BrahMos cells, which means that 16 BrahMos missiles, to a main gun, to a rocket launcher, to then Barrack 8, which is a SAM, which is surface to air missile. This is basically for anti-helicopter and anti what we call as aircrafts, in that anti-air based threats in that sense. Then it has torpedoes for the submarines, and then you have small guns for, in that regard, any form of anti-piracy. So you can say they're very capable, very, very capable. Total 16 missiles here, 16 missiles here, which is surface to air missiles. BrahMos is the most capable cruise missile in the world. And further we have one torpedo each on both sides of the what we call as torpedo launch guns in that regard. A destroyer, as the name suggests, is a proper destroyer. It is a complete package. If you go to, for example, a frigate, in a frigate maybe you will not get BrahMos, and by reducing the armament on it, it becomes lighter and therefore can move faster. So maybe this will not be there, this will not be there. It will have light machine guns more, because it would be for use for anti-piracy. A corvette will not have any form of SAMs. It will only be what we call as very heavy cannons or guns on it. And the aspect of amphibious, it will not have very heavy, it will maximum have a cannon, but will have a lot of storage inside it. So I took this opportunity to basically give you a certain perspective about how these aspects of destroyer, frigate and these things come through. So remember, INS Mumbai was in the news, but I have given you the whole overview of this topic. The last topic which we discussed today is called a term which was there in Hindu. It comes from time to time. It's called sonoluminescence. Now, it is believed that light is emitted in empty space, which is right, and we believe that the light cannot be produced independently underwater, meaning it needs a ray of what we call as photons, or it needs sunlight or any form of artificial light which has to go and penetrate into the surface of the water to introduce light in that regard. However, this word sonoluminescence means sound based luminescence, wherein in 1934, when a small bubble was trapped in a liquid and a powerful sound wave was pushed, it flashed. You can see here, these are flashes which are shown. It flashed, producing light itself. This is called sono. Sono means sound, luminescence means light. Now, the point was that once a very high or low pressure was created within the water, it expanded so rapidly that the temperature went up thousands of Kelvin and then collapsed on itself. And therefore, this word sonoluminescence means light produced by bubbles in water when introduced to sound. So, this as a term should be in your vocabulary. You can expect it anywhere from, because it is in the news, can be coming in the PCS or UPSC, but it is for your general knowledge in that regard to complete the set. So, before I end the session, remember about the offer. It ends tomorrow or day after, and a very good offer with regards to 18 months course at 24,999. What we've discussed today is try to understand this terminology called new age delivery devices, very important. Then we also try to understand the concept of NPS, but I tried to create now 4 distinctions rather than 3. I hope now this is totally sorted for you. We also understood the concept of classical languages, 6 of them. I've given you a question, do attempt that, and 5 questions on Telegram for you. And last but not the least, we try to understand the frigate, destroyer, cruiser, corvette, and in the end, what we again tried to summarize is a terminology. I've tried to push 2 terminologies, a good mix of topics, and I hope everything is sorted. So, with this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much. I will see you soon. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.